David was a young shepherd boy. He spent his days in the fields, surrounded by the gentle bleating of his sheep and the warm embrace of the sun. The fields were his playground, and the sheep were his companions. He lived in the land of Israel, a place of rolling hills and lush valleys. The land was beautiful with its vast landscapes and serene environment. It was a place where nature thrived, and David felt a deep connection to it. He looked after his father's sheep with great care and responsibility. Each sheep was precious to him, and he knew them all by name. He would lead them to green pastures and still waters, ensuring they were always safe and well fed. David was a good shepherd. He was gentle and kind, always putting the needs of his flock before his own. His dedication and love for his sheep were evident in everything he did. He was brave and strong. Despite his young age, David possessed a courage that was beyond his years. He faced many dangers in the wilderness, but he never backed down. He protected his sheep from lions and bears. When predators threatened his flock, David would stand his ground, armed with nothing but his sling and his faith. He had fought off lions and bears, proving his bravery time and time again. David loved to play his harp and sing songs. Music was his solace, and he would often sit under the shade of a tree, strumming his harp and singing praises. His songs were filled with joy and gratitude, echoing through the fields. One day, his father called him. "David," he said, "your brothers are fighting in a war." David listened intently, his heart filled with concern for his brothers. "I want you to take them food," his father instructed. Without hesitation, David obeyed his father. He gathered food supplies, carefully packing them for the journey ahead. He gathered food and set out for the battlefield. The journey was long and arduous, but David was determined. He walked with purpose, his mind focused on the task at hand. When David arrived, he saw the Israelite army lined up. The sight was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. The soldiers were ready for battle, their faces set with determination. They were facing a giant. The enemy was unlike anything David had ever seen. The sheer size and presence of the giant were overwhelming. The giant's name was Goliath. He was a formidable opponent, towering over everyone on the battlefield. His armor gleamed in the sunlight and his voice boomed like thunder. He was very tall and scary. Goliath's presence struck fear into the hearts of the Israelite soldiers, but David, with his unwavering faith and courage, knew that he had to face this giant, no matter the odds. Goliath was a giant among men. He was not just physically imposing, but also a symbol of terror and invincibility. His very presence on the battlefield sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest soldiers. He was taller than any man David had ever seen. His height alone was enough to make him a formidable opponent, but it was his sheer strength and the aura of invincibility that made him truly terrifying. He wore a helmet of brass and a coat of mail. These were not just pieces of armor, they were symbols of his might and his readiness for battle. The gleam of his armor in the sunlight was a constant reminder of the challenge he posed. He carried a huge spear. This was no ordinary weapon, it was a massive, deadly instrument that only someone of Goliath's immense strength could wield. The spearhead alone was as heavy as a weaver's beam, and it glinted menacingly in the sunlight. Every day Goliath came out and shouted to the Israelites. His voice was like thunder, echoing across the valley and striking fear into the hearts of the Israelite soldiers. It was a daily reminder of their helplessness and the challenge they faced. Goliath as Goliath. "Choose a man to fight me." His challenge was clear and unrelenting. He demanded a champion, someone brave enough to face him in single combat. It was a call to arms that no one dared to answer. "If he kills me, we will be your servants." Goliath's terms were simple yet daunting. The fate of the entire army rested on the outcome of this duel. It was a high-stakes gamble that no one was willing to take. "But if I kill him, you will be our servants." The consequences of defeat were dire. The Israelites would become slaves, their freedom and future hanging in the balance. Goliath's confidence was unshakable, and his words were a constant reminder of the peril they faced. The Israelite soldiers were terrified. Their fear was palpable, a collective dread that paralyzed them. They had faced many battles, but none like this. The very thought of facing Goliath was enough to break their spirit. No one dared to face the giant. The soldiers avoided eye contact, each hoping that someone else would step forward, but no one did. The fear of Goliath was too great and the risk too high. David's brothers were also afraid. They were seasoned warriors, but even they were not immune to the fear that Goliath inspired. They huddled together, seeking comfort in each other's presence, but finding none. They huddled together, their faces pale. David watched in disbelief. He could not understand how these mighty warriors, his own brothers, could be so paralyzed by fear. It was a sight that shook him to his core. How could they let this giant scare them? David's mind raced with questions. How could these men, who had faced countless dangers, be so terrified of one man? It was a question that gnawed at him, challenging his understanding of courage and fear. Weren't they the mighty warriors of Israel? These were the men who had fought bravely in many battles, who had stood their ground against formidable foes, yet here they were, cowering in fear before Goliath. It was a sight that David could not reconcile with the stories of their past heroism. David's heart pounded. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Why was everyone so afraid? This giant was defying the living God. David stepped forward. David, I will fight him, his brothers scoffed. David's brothers as David's brothers. You're just a boy. Go back to your sheep. But David was determined. He went to King Saul, the leader of the Israelites. David, Your Majesty, I will fight Goliath. Saul looked at David and laughed. King Saul as King Saul. You're just a boy. Goliath is a mighty warrior. King Saul was surprised by David's courage. He could see the fire of faith in the young boy's eyes. King Saul as King Saul. Very well. Go, and may the Lord be with you. Saul offered David his armor, but it was too heavy. David refused it. He knew that his strength came from God, not from armor. Instead, David went to a nearby stream. He picked up 5 smooth stones and put them in his shepherd's bag. He carried his sling in his hand and went out to meet the giant. Goliath laughed when he saw David, a mere shepherd boy, standing before him. The sight was almost comical to the giant warrior, who had been undefeated in battle.
"Am I a dog," he roared, his voice echoing through the valley, "that you come at me with sticks?" His eyes blazed with anger and disbelief. "That you come at me with sticks?" he sneered, waving his massive spear as if to emphasize the absurdity of the situation.
"You come against me with sword and spear," he shouted back, his voice steady and unwavering despite the giant's intimidating presence. "But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." David's words were filled with conviction and faith, a stark contrast to Goliath's arrogance. David stood firm, his heart filled with the courage that only faith could provide. He knew he was not alone in this battle.
Goliath roared with laughter, unable to comprehend the audacity of this young boy. To him it was a joke, a mere distraction from the real battles he was used to. He charged at David with his spear raised, ready to end this farce with a single blow. The ground shook under his massive footsteps. David ran towards Goliath, unafraid. His steps were light and quick, driven by a purpose far greater than himself. David's heart beat fast, but he knew God was with him. Each beat was a reminder of the divine strength that flowed through him. He had faced lions and bears before, protecting his flock with nothing but his sling and his faith. Those experiences had prepared him for this moment. He knew God would give him the strength to face this giant too. His trust in the Lord was unshakable, and it fueled his every move. As he ran, David reached into his bag and took out a smooth stone, carefully chosen from the stream earlier. He placed it in his sling, his mind focused and clear. With practiced precision, he swung the sling, the stone whistling through the air. His aim was true, guided by a higher power. The stone struck Goliath on the forehead, sinking deep into his skull. The giant's laughter turned to a gasp of shock and pain. Goliath fell to the ground with a thunderous crash, his massive body lifeless. The impossible had happened. The giant was defeated. David stood over Goliath's fallen body, his heart still racing but filled with a profound sense of victory. He had done it, not by his own strength, but by the power of God. The Israelites erupted in cheers, their fear turning to triumph. They had witnessed a miracle, a testament to the power of faith and courage. David looked up to the heavens, his heart filled with gratitude. He knew that this victory was not his alone, but a testament to the glory of God. The battlefield was silent, save for the echoes of the Israelites' cheers. Goliath lay defeated and David stood victorious, a symbol of what faith can achieve. David reached into his bag. He took out a stone and put it in his sling. He swung the sling around and around, faster and faster. Goliath was almost upon him. With all his might, David let the stone fly. The stone whizzed through the air. It struck Goliath right in the middle of his forehead. The giant staggered. He raised his hand to his head, his face contorted in surprise and pain. The stone sank deep into Goliath's forehead. The giant let out a roar of pain and surprise. He stumbled and fell to the ground with a crash. The earth shook beneath him. David had done what no one else could do. He had defeated the giant. David ran towards the fallen giant. He pulled out Goliath's sword and cut off his head. The Philistines, seeing their champion fall, panicked and fled. When the Israelites saw that Goliath was dead, they cheered. They had won the battle. They had been saved from the Philistines. David had saved his people. He was a true hero. David. The Israelites chased after the fleeing Philistines, shouting victory cries. They had been afraid of the giant, but David had shown them that even a giant could be defeated. David returned to King Saul, Goliath's head in his hand. King Saul, you are a true hero, David. King Saul embraced David. David's story teaches us that with faith in God, even the impossible is possible. David was just a young shepherd boy, but he was braver than the strongest soldier because he trusted in God. David knew that God was with him, and that gave him the courage to face any danger. We may not face giants like Goliath, but we all face challenges in our lives. We may feel scared or alone, but David's story reminds us that God is always with us. When we trust in him, he gives us the strength to overcome any obstacle. David's victory over Goliath made him a hero. He went on to become the greatest king of Israel. He was a man after God's own heart, known for his courage, faith, and leadership. But even as king, David never forgot the lesson he learned as a shepherd boy facing a giant. With God, even the smallest can overcome the biggest challenges. David's story continues to inspire people of all ages. It reminds us that with God on our side, we can overcome any obstacle and achieve great things. David's story is more than just a story. It's a reminder that God can do amazing things through ordinary people who trust in him. When we face challenges in our lives, we can remember David and Goliath. We can remember that no matter how big the problem, God is bigger. And just like David, with faith and courage, we can overcome any